Welcome on in. WIP Daily, Joe Giglio with you. Appreciate everyone listening, subscribing, following the podcast. We're, of course, watching at our 94 WIP YouTube page, which is growing. And I know a lot of our other podcasts here at WIP put up videos there and do live podcasts. Yesterday, Marks Reese were on the YouTube page, so check it out. And, of course, subscribe to the 94 WIP YouTube page. Tucker will join me in a few minutes to give his thoughts on some of these as it's here. I mean, we've made it. It is officially NFL season. Tonight, the Lions and the Chiefs will kick off the season. It should be a fun one. And the Eagles, of course, Sunday against the Patriots, week 1. Tomorrow, we'll talk for a lot of tomorrow's episode about this particular game against the Patriots. But right now, I was thinking, we're at that stage now where we've kind of talked through a lot of the different issues and the issues they might have or issues, they don't have. Obviously, there's parts of this roster with the Eagles that are excellent. The quarterback position, if healthy, the offensive line, the pass rush front seven on defense, the cornerbacks, all really good. The wide receivers, tight end weapons, outstanding. I think the running game could be really good as well, even with the loss of Miles Sanders at free agency. But there's some things that are still up for debate, and we don't know the answer yet. So I thought today could be fun to dive into some of the biggest questions heading into this Eagles season and really decide if I hope they're going to work out or I really believe they're going to work out. And there's a big difference there. It's a subtle difference, but we all hope the Eagles are going to answer all these questions in a positive way and win a ton of football games and it be like last year in effect, but hopefully a different outcome at the end. But do you really believe that? Do you really believe all these questions are going to be answered in the right direction and not in a weakness for the team? So let's dive into it. We'll bring Tucker on a little bit to give his thoughts on some of these. So the biggest one and the first one that jumped out to me when I was thinking about the questions for this team is, will this defense be as good this year? And my answer to this one is clear. I hope it will be. I don't believe it will be. And there's quite a few reasons for this. And some of it does have to do with the defensive coordinator switch. As much as Jonathan Gannon is now a villain in Philadelphia. And if you missed it, that Athletic article yesterday did not paint Gannon in a positive light, just unbecoming of a coach in the NFL to throw another coach, to kind of out him in effect for a private conversation. I thought a lot of it was just, Gannon, he really is. I was a fan of his when he was here. I've become less of a fan since he's left, but I can't deny he didn't get results last year. He did. You may have not liked the style. He got results. So I'm not sure what they have in Sean Desai. He may be just as good. He may be better than Jonathan Gannon. I don't know yet. We will find out starting on Sunday. But I do know this, independent of Gannon, independent of Desai, the defense just doesn't have as much ability. And let me rephrase that. It doesn't have as much sure things as it had last year. Now, the ability, the ceiling might be higher. Sidney Brown's ceiling might ultimately be to be a very high-end starting safety in the NFL. It might be. Nakobe Dean's ceiling, I believe right now, is higher than a TJ Edwards. The ceiling for Jalen Carter may be better than Javon Hargrave. I mean, heck, he could be Warren Sapp. So the ceiling, I think, is higher, but are they ready to be that from day one? Is Carter on Sunday in New England going to be as good as Hargrave was last year? I doubt it. Is Nakobe Dean going to be play for play as good as Edwards this year was last year? Maybe. Is Zach Cunningham going to be as good as Kaiser White was last year? I would say no. Is Reed Blankenship ready to be as good as Chauncey Gardner-Johnson? Probably not. Is whoever the second safety ends up being is going to be as good as Epps was last year? I don't know that. So there's some question marks. I hope they're better, but I don't believe right now they are. Plus, they're facing much better much better offenses, which is going to make things hard. All right, second one. Will Jalen Hurts actually be better? I believe on this one. I believe he will. We mentioned that the other day in 23 bowl predictions or takes on this 2023 team. I think Hurts will just get better. Now, there's probably a line of statistics that, how high can he go is what I'm kind of trying to say there. Last year he had a very lower baseline. I thought in 2021, his first year as a full-time starter, he's like the 20th best quarterback in pro football. And then boom, he was like a top 2 or 3 quarterback in pro football. So that jump was exponential. He probably can't take another statistical exponential jump, but he could be better. He could be more efficient, higher completion percentage. Will he throw less interceptions? That might be hard because he'll probably throw the football more, and you could have a fluky interception here or there. So I'm not going to base things on just interceptions, but passer rating, efficiency. You go to more advanced metrics. I think he'll get better. Everyone said all summer his accuracy was better, and he'll just get smarter and better adept at breaking down defenses. I believe Jalen Hurts will be a better quarterback this year than he was last year. Are these new coordinators on the same level as the guys they're replacing? I think a lot of people out there believe they are. I hope they are. I don't know that yet. And with Gannon Desai, just talked about a few minutes ago, it could be a wash. And I think the Eagles' philosophy on defense dictates who they hire more than the person they hire. They want to play defense a certain way. There'll be different wrinkles. It seems like Desai's going to blitz a little bit more just based on what we know and maybe some more stunts, creativity up front, moving guys around. But the idea of this defense isn't going to just suddenly change. They're not going to just become Wink Martindale, Rex Ryan sent in the house, and leave the corners on an island. That's not who the Eagles want to be. They don't think it's the right way to play defense, and I agree with them. So we'll see on that. As far as offense, it's all hope. I think we have underrated how good Shane Steichen was. And if you want to peel back the curtain of that article I referenced with Jonathan Gannon yesterday at Athletic, should he have come out and said he was the one that suggested Sirianni should give up play calling and Sirianni was struggling? No, I mean, he shouldn't have. But he also revealed in there, if we do believe it to be true, that Sirianni was obviously insecure about people thinking he was a failure. I think there's probably a reason why we didn't find out for a while that Sirianni wasn't calling those plays. And now that we kind of have all this information, I think it puts a spotlight back on how good of a job Shane Steichen did with this offense for a year and a half. I mean, just go look at the Eagles' offense from midway through the 2021 season through the end of last year. It was, I mean, you rank them: Chiefs, Eagles, Bengals. The last couple of years, you throw the Niners, Cowboys in, but just it's Chiefs, Eagles. You could make that case, just offense, putting points on the board. And now the guy calling those plays is out of here. I don't know if Brian Johnson's going to have a feel for it, a rhythm for it, be able to match wits with Bill Belichick on Sunday. People think highly of Brian Johnson. He might be on his way. And with this group of players he has, maybe, he ends up doing close to as good of a job. But that's a hope right now. I don't know if Desai and Brian Johnson are as good as Gannon and Steichen. I don't know that yet. I don't believe it yet. Can Jalen Carter effectively replace Javon Hargrave? There's a belief out there he can from day one. That one's also a hope for me. I see the upside. I mean, when you have comparisons to Warren Sapp and John Randall and some of the great defense, pass rushing defensive tackles the game has ever seen, of course there's great hope for Jalen Carter. And I think it's been, since he arrived here, it's been a very positive outlook so far from his teammates, from the coaches, from the flash play we saw in the game against the Ravens in the preseason to what we heard he did in the joint practice against the Browns. It's all been good. Interesting article ESPN had the other day, Tim McManus, on the Eagles' path to drafting him and kind of what went into that, and him kind of selling himself at the end. That was kind of the final piece of the puzzle, that he called them and basically said, I want to be an Eagle. And they took the chance on him. If you watch him for 5 minutes, you could see there's something different about him that most defensive tackles just can't do. I mean, they just can't knife through the guard or push a guard out of the way and rush the quarterback. But he's a rookie. And we also know there's been questions in his past about his work ethic and practice habits. That stuff matters when you get to the NFL more than it does in college. So I have pretty strong hope he could be a very high-level rookie. But do I believe he's going to just replicate what Hargrave did last year just from day one? I don't believe that yet. I got to see it. All right, let's get to Nakobe Dean. And can he be the real deal as an inside linebacker for the Eagles? I believe on this. And maybe I'm being pie in the sky on Dean, but he just strikes me as someone who, whenever he gets to play, makes plays well. I mean, go back and think about, if you're a college fan, or just even watch the biggest games. And maybe you haven't watched Georgia week to week, but we all watched Georgia the last couple of years, whether it be in a SEC title game against Alabama, or a national championship semi, or a championship game. That they've been in those games, for the whole time Dean was there, certainly, and that continues now. And you watch those teams, and you think about, a lot of those guys are here now, right? You got Keely Ringo, you got Nolan Smith, you got Jordan Davis, you got Jalen Carter. But just think back to when you watched those games. Who stood out on the field the most often? It was Nakobe Dean. Now, I understand it's a team game, and sometimes the linebacker can be the one filling a gap and making a tackle, even though it's Davis busting up the inside of the line, or it's Carter. I get it. They all work in concert together. But just for a second, think about that. Who was often highlighted? Who was often the one making the play running across the field, reading the opposing quarterback in play, and making the play 3 yards to the backfield. It was the Kobe Dean. I can't get that out of my head that on the field with all these other great players, he was often the one they were talking about. Chris Fowler and Herbstreit were saying, another great play by the Kobe Dean. There's something about him that he's a playmaker and he's instinctual. Maybe he lacks a little bit of size. Maybe you wonder if he could hold up over time. He did have some injury concerns, but I think he could play. And I think the Eagles have set him up to be able to be the guy in this defense with the green dot to make some plays. All right, I got 2 more, and then we'll bring Tucker to give his thoughts on whatever these questions kind of stood out to him, and maybe a question he has in his head, and whether he's hoping or believing in it. Do the old guys have one more run in them? And that obviously would mean a J.C. Kelsey, a Lane Johnson, a Fletcher Cox, a Brandon Graham. I think they do, even though age is creeping up, and they could fall off at any point. I mean, that's the way the NFL works. It's the way sports work. But I think they do, and I believe they do, because of the way how good the offensive guys still are. I mean, Lane and Jason are still playing at Hall of Fame levels, so their play hasn't fallen off. And as far as the defensive guys, Fletcher and Brandon aren't playing at the level the offensive guys are, even though a great sack year for Brandon last year. But I think the way the Eagles use them in a rotation, the way they give them time off, the snaps aren't high, rest during the week, they can manage it. It always reminds me, with specifically Brandon and Fletcher, like in baseball, watching a guy who used to be, a 35, 40 home run guy in his prime, a star player, an all-star, and then kind of relegate and become more of a bench player, platoon guy with a really good team towards the end of their career. Tim Raines did this toward the end of his career, Hall of Famer. Cecil Fielder did it. What Raul Ibanez is not quite as good as those guys, but he kind of became something like that very late in his career. But that happens a lot. And you get a lot out of that player, even though the player isn't what he used to be, because you put him in good spots to succeed. So I believe they've got one more year, all of them, of playing at the level we expect them to. And the last one, and this is a hope, and we're going to, it's going to start changing the way we talk about the Eagles, because if they stack one more great year, we're going to expect greatness. Until then, it's a hope for greatness. And really what I'm thinking is the combination of Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni, are they more Donovan McNabb, Andy Reid, which is when you start to expect 12 wins a year? Or is this more Doug Peterson, Carson Wentz, where it obviously went on, it didn't sustain. And injuries played a big role for Carson. And I'm not saying individually these guys are the same as kind of the comparison, but one combination, sustained greatness, excellence, knocking on the door to titles every year. The other one just simply didn't. And I hope Jalen and Sirianni are obviously more towards the Andy and Donovan, but I don't believe it yet. I got to see that for one more year. If they put 12 wins on the board this year, even if they don't win the Super Bowl, but they put 12 wins on the board, win a division for back-to-back times, obviously it's the first time since Donovan and Andy, then you start to just pencil them in like we pencil the Chiefs in now. And I think the way people are starting to pencil the Bengals in. Tucker, what hits you, and what maybe you have a question in your head that you're trying to figure out if you hope or believe it? Because for a team that's projected to be as good as the Eagles, they do have a lot of questions, whether they're big or small. There's questions here.
Yeah, and I think there are probably 29 or 30 NFL teams that would swap the Eagles questions for their own. Like they have a lot of questions that come from a place of privilege. But the two that I have, one you hit on it, is the coordinators. Like I just think no matter what you thought of Jonathan Gannon, who I wasn't very high on, like Sean Desai has done this 1 year and wasn't really that successful at it. Obviously, he went and learned with Pete Carroll and probably has picked up a few tricks along the way. But something stood out to me in a press conference he said 2 weeks ago where someone asked, hey, are you going to be on the sideline calling the game or are you going to be in the press box? And he just said, well, we have to figure that out. Well, like, if you don't even know where you're going to stand, like that's a pretty steep learning curve as far as I'm concerned. And you add in the fact that, I thought Shane Steichen was a fantastic offensive mind. You look at his resume and the way he developed both Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts. And, no matter what you think of Brian Johnson, who I think can probably do the job at a high level, same thing. Those are pretty big shoes to fill. And I don't know if he can necessarily do it starting from day one. So those two guys, I certainly have big questions on. And the second thing I'm not necessarily worried about, but I'm definitely keeping an eye on is how healthy can this team stay after last year? I mean, they had every starter healthy for the Super Bowl. And you kind of look at it, and I know injuries are random and it's not necessarily, well, everyone was healthy last year, so everyone's going to get hurt this year. But what's the odds that that happens again, right? Like, what's the odds that these guys that you mentioned, some of the older guys like Lane Johnson, Jason Kelsey, who hasn't missed a game in about a decade, Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, like, what's the odds that they all play 17 games? What's the odds that Jalen Hurts stays healthy for 17 games? Because we haven't seen that yet in his career. They were fortunate last year with just how lucky they were with their injuries and how sporadic they were. But I don't know if this team has the depth that they had a year ago or maybe 5 years ago when they went to the Super Bowl in 2017. That's something I worry about, is whether or not they can stay healthy throughout the season. And if they don't, and if they do get hit with injuries, do they have enough talent on the back end of their roster to keep them afloat?
Yeah, it's a good point on the injuries. And last year, they got, I mean, look, to have 22 starters available in the Super Bowl, we'll probably never see that again, especially now. You need to play 20 games to get there. But the last thing on that particular point is they got kind of lucky when they had their injuries last year, because they did. They had some injuries. It wasn't like they didn't. I mean, Jalen Hurts missed 2 games. But think about the point of the schedule. I know it was a Cowboys game and the Saints game, but they were so far ahead of the pack they could lose both games and still get the number 1 seed, still win the division. If those games happen at a different point, or if they happen, and think about it, if Jalen doesn't have the bye week after week 18 because he didn't look right in that game, and then another bye week after the title game because in that game he didn't throw the football particularly well. I think his shoulder was just banged up. Like, they had 2 bye weeks in a very small period where Jalen could basically rest for 4 weeks in a 2-month period and then be at his best this Super Bowl. So things really did line up. Sometimes that's serendipitous. Sometimes it doesn't go that way. We shall see. A lot of questions. I agree with Tucker. Most teams would trade their questions for the Eagles. The more questions that turn into belief for all of us, the better off this team's going to be. Enjoy the NFL back tonight. We'll talk tomorrow and obviously get ready for the Eagles and the Patriots. Appreciate everyone listening to WIP Daily.